This episode is sponsored by Linode. Do you need a Linux server for your latest creation? Then check them out. They provide SSDs, 40 gigabit per second network connections, and top-of-the-line hardware to run your server on. It deploys Linux in seconds from the Linode cloud, and you can choose your Linux distro and node location right from the manager. They have locations in Asia, North America, and Europe, and they have a sweet set of tools to make it easy to manage it. If the web interface isn't your thing, they also have an API and a command line, so definitely go check them out. They also provide two-factor authentication, IPv6, DNS manager, cloning, scaling, and everything else that you want. So definitely get the most out of your Linux node and check them out at linode.com. And check them out at devchat.tv/linode. Hey everybody, and welcome to another My JS Story. This week, our guest is John-David Dalton. John, do you want to say hi?
Hi, it's me, JD.
Do you prefer JD?
Oh, I'm not picky.
Not picky.
But I'll just say sure.
Nice. Now, we've had you on JavaScript Jabber, haven't we? I couldn't find the episode.
I believe so, and I probably was talking about Lodash.
Yeah, I believe so, and it was probably quite a while ago.
Yes.
It's easier to find the more recent ones. So yeah, I think you're pretty well known out there in the JavaScript community with all that you've done in Lodash and some of these other contributions you've made to JavaScript. And we're going to dig into that. But I kind of like to back way up and get people's origin story and see, okay, how did this all get started? And look, he's really human, I promise.
Yeah.
So how did you get into programming?
So this was probably when I was a junior in high school, and there was a old World War I flight sim that I used to play online over the 56K modem, and I got involved. Yeah, and I got involved with a flight squadron, and so we would all get together online and fly this old video game, and they needed a website. So I created like a GeoCities website for them, and that's what got me into JavaScript, because then I had to enhance the page with mouse over effects and like the cursor trail and all of that stuff. And from there, I started doing things like I created a Dr. Wiley little animated bot that would say random things in a little speech bubble with HTML on your page, so like a little widget there. And I was the first person in my high school to do an assignment, turn in a web page as an assignment, and submit it for like an English class paper or something. So I used to spend my lunch breaks learning JavaScript and programming in it. I created like a little Mario game engine, Mario 1, with movable blocks that you could click and drag. And then the bad guys would react to it. So as you could click and drag, and then the Goomba would like fall through, or Mario could jump over it. And that was back with the document.layers, document.all, IE 6, maybe 5.5, and Netscape Navigator, whatever that was, version back then. And that's kind of what set me off onto programming. Before that, I wanted to be an animator or something in animation, and so I started doing programming and then getting into like Macromedia Flash stuff, because that was big back then, and that led to ActionScript, which was another ECMA script-based language. So I've been like just JavaScript-y based languages all the way through, and so then I did for a while. I took a break from JavaScript and did ActionScript and Flash animation stuff for a while, and was almost going to make that my day job too, but then programming sucked me back in, and I started learning PHP.
Oh wow!
And then PHP, they needed to create a web app, and then that got me right back into JavaScript. I started doing JavaScript again heavily in 2005. For like my first real job. And that was when Ajax was coined. And that's when Prototype.js came up. So I remember had just gotten hired, and the devs that were on the team were like, "Have you heard of this thing called Ajax?" And I was like, "Yes." I was already on the pulse. I was listening to Ajaxian, or not listening to, but reading the Ajaxian blog posts back then, because that was the place to find all of your JavaScript news. So I got right back into it. And I remember being really intimidated by JavaScript libraries like Prototype.js. I thought it was super confusing and really hard. And there was that first summer of 2005, I had to get right back into the swing of things. And I remember talking to KingX. KingX is his alias. It's Yuri Zastev. You can find him on Twitter at KingX. And he was a contributor back then. And he said that I should really start reading the JavaScript specification, the ECMAScript specification. And that got me into getting a real deeper understanding of why the language does what it does. And so it kind of removed a lot of the WTF from the language for me, because I knew that there was always a rhyme or reason for something. And then there was actually a document I could go to and look up exactly why things do what they do. So that was really cool.
Nice. So let me back you up a little bit. It sounds like you started out with web and JavaScript, kind of when JavaScript was a newish thing, and then you kind of came around through all these other technologies back to JavaScript. Which of those were your favorites, and what was it about JavaScript that kind of got you back into, oh, wow, this is really powerful, or this is really cool, or whatever it was that made you want to do JavaScript?
I had been tinkering with programming languages, but what I liked about ActionScript at the time, after I transitioned to that, was that it was super powerful. You could create games with it, or you could script your animations. So that was fun.
Yep.
I eventually created a tool that was a game genie for Flash games that you could use, because at the time you could get these decompilers that would show you the variables in the game, and then you could use JavaScript to manipulate the variables in the Flash game. There was an API that you could use. So I created a tool that you could, for example, change your lives to infinite lives, or grow your character, or shrink your character, or access even hidden characters that they didn't actually put in the game, but they had the animations for. So that was super fun. And I like doing that kind of tinkering stuff. That also led me to a page that you could probably find on Web Archive called, I think it was called Proto, or maybe it was called Layer 51 or Proto 51. Mm-hmm. And that was, at the time, that was a web page that had a lot of JavaScript or ActionScript snippets, but I mean, they're interchangeable. It was things for extending the built-in prototypes. So adding array methods or string methods or regex methods. So I had already started doing that in ActionScript. And so that's why Prototype, the JavaScript library, was so appealing to me, because I was just like, oh, wow, I could just transition right to that. My favorite, though, I mean, is JavaScript. I've been doing it for, I guess, almost 20 years. So time flies. But yeah, that's my favorite one. PHP it made me appreciate JavaScript more, because at the time it didn't have that interface. It had it was like they had the array underscore push kind of things for manipulating arrays instead of the nice dot syntax, or later on the arrow syntax. So, but yeah, that's what got me into it, was HTML, and then games. Some kind of game always pulled me back to it. So
nice. That's nice. So yeah, so you get back into JavaScript. Man, I remember the days of Prototype. When I got into web development, it was a little bit after that. It was 2006, and so jQuery was just kind of starting to become a thing. And
right.
Yeah, and so I built some apps with Prototype and some apps with jQuery. And yeah, I remember fiddling with Scriptaculous and a bunch of other stuff.
I remember when John Resig submitted an entry to Dean Edwards' DOM content. I think it was DOM content loaded, or it was an event listener shim or library challenge. This was before, I think, before he did jQuery. Mm-hmm. And I it's kind of funny, because you never think like this person's going to create jQuery and change change everything. But sure enough, within a year later, jQuery was a thing. And at the time, I did not like jQuery. I was very much prototype all the things. And eventually, I grew to respect jQuery because as a library, I became a library author. And I really liked, jQuery is the example of how to create a successful library.
Mm-hmm.
It's taken over everything. It's on 90% of the web pages on the internet or something like that. Like it's crazy big. So I really dig that now. But at the time, I was hardcore prototype. I didn't like MooTools either. Like I was very much a fanboy of augmenting prototypes. And then over time, I realized that augmenting prototypes wasn't so great whenever you wanted to include other code on your page, because you would have conflicts and collisions. And later on, it would do things like block the language from advancing. So super not cool to extend prototypes that you don't own. And that led me to work on something. This may sound familiar, but I took prototype and I forked it and I made it faster and support more things, which is essentially what I did with Lodash for underscore. But this was my first time doing it. And I started that in 2008 and worked on it for 3 years and never got out of alpha. So I didn't know how to ship and just push it out there for everyone. But I spent a bunch of time on it. I created something called Sandboxed Natives, which got me into talking at conferences. Sandboxed Natives are still something that hasn't been done a ton out there. But what it would do is instead of extending the prototypes on the built-ins for your current frame, it would import new built-ins, so like a new array constructor, a new date constructor, a new regex, a new string, and then augment those. So then you could use an array or a date or a regex of this Fuse.js, and it wouldn't collide or step on the built-ins of the current page. And so I would do that by I used a cool ActiveX object called HTML file in IE, which would pull in a brand new built-ins, or I would fall back to an iframe, dynamically create the iframe, script the built-ins to become accessible, pull them off, and then remove the iframe so it wouldn't affect the frames count of your page. And then, or I would do a wrapper form of it, which was the worst case, where I had to fake the new constructor. And I eventually even created one for Node at the time, like 2009, 2010. I created an extension there. And that got me used to getting into the library creator mode and committing regularly to a project and having to deal with feature requests and all the stuff that kind of goes into maintenance of an online open source project. And then after that fizzled out, I ended up transitioning to performance and benchmarking, and that which landed me my Microsoft job a couple of years later. So it's been quite a journey from the flight sim or flight squadron webpage back in high school.
So what do you think it is that you've learned over all these years of doing this kind of work? What would you expect somebody else to learn along a journey similar to yours?
Well, I've always been, and it's on my bio, it says JavaScript tinkerer. I just like to poke at environments and I like doing things in an environment that is something that goes against the norm or is something that is a little different. So that's fun for me. So for example, the Sandboxed Natives were something that no one had done before. It was super fresh. Like most people didn't know that you could create an entirely new built-in and import that in, and it would work. Like you could have two array constructors that both produced arrays but from different origins. Or with Lodash, the whole thing for that was that a JavaScript library could be faster than the built-ins in the browser. And so that was the nice moment where devs kind of do a double take and go, wow, I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know you could get faster than built-ins there. So that was my challenge for that one. That's what I dig, and it's something that I don't stress out a ton about. I know there's lots of devs that write about burnout or feeling overwhelmed, and I have a way of dealing with that. I tend to I do programming as a hobby, and I program as a day job too. So how do you separate the two, right? Well, what I do is I incorporate a bit of both. I incorporate my hobby into my day job, so it's fun. And I do a little bit of programming a day, so I don't get overwhelmed. I don't have this massive backlog of things to accomplish. And sometimes it's just one commit a day, but doing that keeps the overwhelmed feeling at bay. Usually what I do is if I start to feel overwhelmed, I just say, hey, if I just start contributing a little bit over time, like over a week or over 2 weeks, that adds up to like 15 or 20 commits, which is 15 or 20 commits more than I would have had if I didn't do anything, right? And it just takes about 30 minutes or 15 minutes a day to do a little bit. And so that's how I manage that. What I would say to others is work-life balance has been a challenge. Whenever I first started open source work, my wife would say she was a JavaScript widow, which was that I spent way too much time on open source, and it was a problem. I eventually learned, and I think this is something that everyone just kind of has to go through. Like whenever you get your first job, you end up, at least for me it was, I would spend a lot of time at work, even when I didn't have to be, because I wanted to leave a mark there. And I didn't understand at the time that if you work that hard all the time, you're going to cause stress in your life and burnout. And I learned to put things and prioritize things like family first and downtime over something like open source. Like open source is bonus, and JavaScript and community work is bonus stuff, right? And so it shouldn't take priority over real world life and real world relationships. So I had to kind of learn that the hard way. And eventually it's worked out. Now I've got, it's been years now, so I've kind of gotten into the flow of things and can handle it. But it was something that totally had to kind of work through. So
that makes sense. It's kind of funny because, yeah, you said JavaScript widow, and that reminds me, I'm involved in Boy Scouts pretty heavily, and so yeah, we have the term Scout widow, which usually refers to somebody whose husband spends more time camping with the boys than they do sleeping in the bed.
Yeah. So it's a thing. I mean, like it's just all it takes is a little bit of priority change, and everything kind of irons out and evens out. Now I'm really big into. Another thing I do. I mentioned that I code a little bit every day. That's turned into over a 4-year commit streak.
Oh wow!
Now, it's gamification is something I really dig. I like it. I like having the green boxes. I wouldn't lose sleep if I lost the streak, but for me, it has helped other things in my life. So, for example, I realized that because I could do something like code commits, that I could probably do something like exercise as well, and that has helped me out. I tweeted a little bit ago that I lost 30 pounds just by exercising and eating better, and that discipline from coding has helped me do that. And I probably wouldn't have been able to stick with it as well if I didn't have that established already. I'm really good at getting into a routine and following through with that routine now. And for me, for coding, that is, in the morning, I'll wake up and do bug triage, which is just closing all the issues that people have opened while I was asleep, resolving those. Then I do exercises, and then exercising, and then it's off to work. And then in the evening, after family time, it is feature work on JavaScript things. is what I like to do. I'll spend maybe an hour doing feature work, which is digging into whatever I'm happen to be working on at the time and doing that. And that's about it for JavaScript. I also work out in the evening, which is a little weird, I think. I split my exercising into two as well. So just like my open source contributions, I divide it into 2 chunks of the day. And then at work, so I work at Microsoft, and I'm on the web apps and frameworks team for Edge, which means I get to do a lot of open source framework and JavaScript library contributions. That's either focused on improving IE or Edge or the web platform for web apps on Windows, Windows 10 especially. But even then, a lot of the times that reaches into things like node packages and other things like that, because JavaScript is part of everyone's build system nowadays. So I do a lot of that there too.
Awesome. So one of the things that I usually talk to people about is their contributions to JavaScript. And it sounds like you're involved in a lot of different areas. One of the things that I think you're probably best known for, or at least what we had you on the show for, was Lodash. Do you want to kind of give us the origin story of Lodash?
Sure. So this is a little weird. I had started to contribute to Underscore probably 6 months before I did Lodash, and there I was trying to improve its IE support. One of my things at the time was that if you're going to support an environment, you support it equally for the other environments that you were supporting. So if you claim to support IE, it should behave the same in IE and say like Firefox at the time. So I had done a pull request there to get that on par, and part of the requirements for the pull request was that it had to not regress performance of the library, and so that required me to think about and optimize Underscore to support the bug fixes, to basically offset the cost of the bug fixes. Well, that pull request ended up not getting included into the library, and so I kept that on the back burner for another time. And then later on, I started to work at a startup called Yuxibu, and they were working on a JavaScript Flash runtime. So this was a JavaScript library that could read the SWF format and display content. And so they were needing a utility library because, as something as complex as that would eventually have utilities that you need to use. And also, I was in charge of creating the standard library that would mimic ActionScript. So going back to ActionScript again. And so that got me into the utilities frame of mind. And then I remembered, like, wow, I really liked, my stuff that I had done on Fuse.js and Prototype. And so I decided that instead of creating a new library, instead of reinventing the wheel, I would base my library off of an existing project. And so I took Underscore, since I had experience optimizing Underscore and fixing the bugs in it. And also at the time, Underscore was the de facto utility library. So I used that as the base. And I leveraged it to do a JSConf talk where I talked about, I think it was the hidden cost of built-ins or the high cost of built-ins. And that's where I showed vanilla JavaScript alternatives to built-ins, and those vanilla JavaScript alternatives became Lodash methods. So that's how it happened. Shortly after that talk, I started contribute in my first commit to Lodash. So I think that the conference ended on like the 4th or 5th, and like the 6th, I started contributing to Lodash.
Nice.
Yep.
What other things do you feel like you've contributed to the JavaScript community? Sometimes it's like, well, I've done these things, and sometimes it's, these are the things that people recognize me for, and then this is my pet project that nobody ever knew about.
Yeah. So for me, I was always pounding the pavement for Prototype.js, and so I did Prototype.js. I contributed at one point in time. My work on Fuse.js ended up influencing the jQuery event system. So even though Fuse.js never got out of alpha, it its implementation shaped things like in the event system in jQuery, which was super cool. So I dug that. And also some of those things that I did actually went and shaped Prototype too and MooTools. So I've always been involved in like these utility-ish libraries. I have a credit on HTML5 Shiv or HTML Shiv because I did one pull request to rewrite the thing and give it some kind of feature. I've forgotten at the time, but now my Twitter handle is in the copyright header of that project, and every once in a while I get tweets about it. So I've done that one. I was really big into performance for a while, and still am. So I created Benchmark.js, which is what powered JSPerf, and now powers other projects too. So I'm kind of known as the perf person, and that actually started because my wife, Kara, she said she's a mechanical engineer. So there's a whole conversation about I am a JavaScript developer. She's a very accomplished engineer. And she looked at how JavaScript devs were measuring performance at the time. And at the time, they were measuring performance the best of 3 runs, that it would spit out a number, and that was how benchmarking was being done, which is not very sound.
Right.
And so she gave me a laundry list of things to do to make a better benchmark. And so I followed them. I was asking her like engineering 101 questions and statistic questions about this or that, just to try to get a better read on performance. And eventually it led to a pretty reliable benchmark library, which has lasted for 7 years now or more. So that's where that came from. And eventually that led me to my work at Microsoft. So when I got hired on at Microsoft, I became the Chakra performance PM.
Oh, okay.
And there I was in charge of helping optimize the JavaScript engine there. So one of my big things was optimizing built-ins, because, as you know, I don't like the fact that I can create a vanilla JavaScript method and have it be faster than a built-in. I want to use the built-ins because they're handy and they don't require downloading extra code. So I pushed to optimize built-ins there, and I also started to get involved in the TC39 just at arm's length. One of the reasons I joined Microsoft was so I could have access to changing the language, and being an employee at Microsoft does give you that ability. And so one of the things I did that I really get excited about is that I helped optimize object.assign. So initially, object.assign had language in it that would have required engines to implement a try-catch kind of behavior. Which would mean that if it failed to assign a property, it would silently skip that property and continue on with its iteration. Something similar to that. But the problem with that is that the performance overhead at the time was pretty significant for most engines. And so you would have gotten this method that was like jQuery's extend or like Lodash's extend or assign, except it was 300, 600 times slower. And I did not want that. So I helped at the July TC39 meeting back then. I showed up and said, like, hey, we should totally change this and drop this. And I got them to change it. So that was my big win there, was getting the language changed to improve object.assign, which is a tiny thing. But I mean, like, that's a super handy method. So I'm happy about that. Other things I have tried to do for the language, I'm still kind of like an outsider when it comes to TC39. And I kind of like being that way too. I don't want to get so involved there that I become grumpy. Because for me, it's always a balance of being grumpy. I always think of myself as kind of like Oscar the Grouch, where I try not to be so grumpy online with JavaScript things. But yeah, that's probably one of my cooler things that I've done. At least that I think is cool. The other thing that I dig was probably that Game Genie code back in the day. That was super nice. I had it actually available for a time on GitHub, and I took it down. I don't know if I've lost that forever though. another thing I did was John Resig was trying to push, this was years ago, he was trying to push a better node list. So John Resig creates jQuery. jQuery has better ways of dealing with collections than the DOM does, and so he tried to improve the node list. So what I did was I took a hybrid approach of Sandboxed Natives and the node list constructor and created a more jQuery or array-like node list. Which is interesting because now certain browsers have like the .forEach method on the node list. So I think that has kind of that has gotten that accomplished there. And then the other thing I'm working on right now, which is not quite ready for prime time yet, is the new ESM loader, and that's the thing I'm geeking out on right now.
Nice. Yeah, usually that's one of the other questions is what are you working on now? But yeah, it sounds like you've been involved at a lot of different levels in a lot of different projects. And we've talked to several people who are involved in TC39, and it's just interesting how that all comes together to form the language that we know as JavaScript.
Yeah. So for me, I've got very much the library or like web dev hat on when it comes to language design. I tend to be reactive instead of
proactive.
Proactive. There you go. I got it. Instead of proactive, because usually you're used to just dealing with what the browser or what the browser vendors give you, right? I mean, you react to the bugs in the browser or the JavaScript engine with a library of some kind. So that's what I'm used to doing. Having the ability to switch the mindset and say, no, I can actually prevent the bugs from getting into the browser or the runtime it takes some getting used to. And part of me still feels like, well, if I don't get it pushed through in the TC39 or some standards body, then I'll always have the library option to fall back on. And I don't know if that hurts me because sometimes I feel like I don't fight hard enough for a certain feature or a certain enhancement because I figure I can always just add a library method. And because a lot of times dealing with standards bodies means a lot of message board threads, a lot of heated debates. And man, I'm always trying to just listen to easy listening music, trying to simmer down. I don't need all that stress, especially for like an open source kind of like what I consider a bonus activity. Like that's a lot of real world stress. So for me, I end up a lot of times just going like just shrugging, going, well, I got this library over here. I'll just address it over there.
Yep, that makes sense. So ESM loaders, what are you doing there?
So what is ESM? ESM is ECMAScript module. ECMAScript module is the import-export. So if you use Babel, you've got a simulation of or an approximation of an ECMAScript module. So what I'm doing is, as you all know, or you may not know, browsers like Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and Edge all have ECMAScript module support, either behind a flag in most cases, or Safari has already shipped theirs, which means you can use modules in the browser now. Super cool, but that has not quite been finalized for Node yet. And so, as part of another thing that I like to do is now that I have this library Lodash, I want to use it to pull the ecosystem up. I want to. That's my power, I guess. My superpower by having that library is that I can use it to. If I set the minimum bar of support to Node 4, then the ecosystem moves to Node 4, and I think that is the my little piece that I can do is to help kind of pull people and pull the environments and support up and keep progress going there. So what I want to do for Lodash 5 is move everyone to ES6 modules. And so to do that, I needed a way to support that in Node 4 plus. ECMAScript modules is going to land in Node around approximate, this is roadmappy stuff, but Node 10. And Node 10 is rough guesstimate timelined for April 2018. It'll be in a flag in Node 9 whenever that ships. When that happens, though, it's still only going to be in Node 10 and not before Node 10. So that leaves me with like a hard choice, right? Like I can't release a library and say like I'm only going to support the bleeding edge version of Node. That would have no adoption, right? Most people are concerned about like 3 versions of Node, or so in this case it's 4 versions of Node, because today we have Node 4, Node 6, Node 7, Node 8, right?
Yep.
And as time goes on, so like when this thing lands, it'll be Node 8, 9, and 10, which will be the versions that you're concerned with. So I wanted something that I could use for Lodash. Lodash has the concern where I can't get the library any bigger as an NPM package, because right now it's kind of critical mass. It's now it's not only the most directly dependent on version or dependency in the NPM ecosystem. It's also the most dependent on version of Lodash is version 4 with the caret. So the Semver version of Lodash version 4. Within the month, it's going to actually lap the top used list. In other words, it's going to beat just version 4 will be the number 1 used package besides Lodash itself.
Oh, wow.
And version 4, so that'll be over 22,000 dependencies. Version 4, though, is over 4 megabytes on disk. And that's not what's being shipped to the browser. That's not what's necessarily being used by the user. That's just, I have 600 modules in there. I have the functional programming alternatives of those modules as well. I have a core build in there. I have the minified builds in there. I've got all this stuff. And all of them have like the inline documentation and all of that stuff in this package, right? So that adds up to like 4 megabytes. But it turns out Lodash is used in lots of places. And so one project, if you look in your node modules folder, you might have, 20 plus copies of Lodash in there. And so that's 20 times 4 plus megabytes. It starts to eat into space on hard drives in space restricted environments like AWS Lambdas or Azure Functions. And so file size has become a real big concern to me. So I can't do something like the hybrid package where I ship my source as ES6 and also as CommonJS. I don't want to do that. That just essentially doubles the size of my package, right? And so that would be like 8 megabytes down. I'm not doing that. So I needed a way to deal with that. And so the way to do that is to just ship ES6 code, full stop. That's it. No transpilation, no other forms there. And what I'm going to do is also ship the code gzipped. So gzipping is something that works in the browser. It's something that everyone kind of uses and almost takes for granted, because you go to a page, it downloads, and it just so happens that it's being gzipped for you, which significantly reduces the size of the JavaScript across the pipe, the connection. But that same kind of reduction can be done on your packages on disk as well. And so Node supports gzipping internally, but doesn't have a way to load the actual module. So I'm going to add support for that. So what's allowed me to do is take Lodash from 4 megabytes down to 90 kilobytes on package size. Yeah, it's super, super significant. I'm geeking out about that.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's also going to be ES6 modules. And so I needed a way to do that, and that's where this loader comes in. And the loader is, again, I went looking for, 'cause I'm not an expert in all things. I tend to find projects with people who are very passionate about a given subject and latch on to that project. So in this case, I went looking for a project that had an established ESM loader. And I'm going to pull up the name of that real quick before I forget. And it was called Reify. And Reify is developed by, I'm going to get his name, Ben Newman of Meteor.js. So Meteor has had ESM loading in its framework for over a year. And so this thing has been hammered on. And so I use that to base my loader off of. And so what this does is it taps into Node's internal module loading hooks and allows me to intercept your source code for your module and then interpolate that and change that to where I can translate your import-export into something that CommonJS can understand. So I do that on the fly and then cache the result for subsequent loads. So you get ES6 syntax in Node 4+. And it loads in like microseconds too. So it's not like a heavy transform, something that like a Babel or other kind of big transform would do. This is just import, export. It handles live bindings as well. And so I'm working with on that. I originally had it not follow the spec in some areas, but that got me some pushback from the TC39 related folks and also the Node related folks. And so now I'm working to make it 100%, well, as spec compliant as I can for the restrictions that are there. But that also means that the code that you write can be Babel transpiled just fine, can work with Webpack just fine. So this code that you write just works in all the other things that you were using, except now it works in Node 4+ without you having to do anything else. And what's great is that your consumers, so people who consume your package, don't have to worry about what your code's written in. They don't have to know that your code is ES6 or that you're consuming ES6 and also CommonJS related code.
Right.
So it's super handy there. What's also nice about it is I've done some work to improve its performance. So it used to take, and I'm using Lodash-ES as its benchmark. Lodash-ES has over 600 modules, so it's a good benchmark for like a worst case scenario if you want to load up everything. It used to be over 1.7 seconds to load all of that, and I've gotten it down to 100 milliseconds, which is on par with CommonJS. So performance is great. I've also worked on reducing its package size. So just as I said, Lodash is 90 kilobytes. The ESM loader itself has no dependencies whenever it's finished, and it will be less than 40 kilobytes. So this zero dependency 40 kilobyte package that you can take a dependency on will then allow you to have import-export syntax for Node 4+. It's super, super neat.
Cool. All right.
Cool.
Well, the last part of this show is usually picks. Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. You were on the show like 4 years ago or so. I don't know if you remember the picks. But yeah, are there any things you want to shout out about? It can be TV shows or anything. Out. Yeah.
Well, mine are going to be programming related, but it's okay.
Awesome.
The first one is the JS Foundation. So if you go to the website js.foundation, the JS Foundation is a nonprofit that helps JavaScript libraries in the community. So for example, Lodash is part of the JS Foundation. Webpack is part of the JS Foundation. Grunt is part of the JS Foundation. They offer, they've done things in the past like workshops for new programmers or people interested in programming. They've helped me with Lodash-related issues. For example, back when left pad was a thing, remember that whole left pad issue? I got Lodash trademarked, and so they helped me do that. I don't know anything about any of that, and they were able to handle that with lawyers and all of that stuff. So I would say check out the JS Foundation, which leads me into the newest member of the JS Foundation, which is a project called Sonar, or Sonarwall. So if you go to so this is a tricky URL because it's sonarwall.com. Sonarwall. It is a linting tool for the web, and this is something my friends at Microsoft have released open source for people. And it allows you to lint your website, and it gives you suggestions and tips for improving the performance of and compatibility of your website.
That's really cool.
I love the name. I'm super jealous of.
So I'm going to jump in here with a couple of picks myself. The first one is there's a group, I'm going to pick an individual. He's not a programmer, but he has been a mentor to me over the last few years. I was part of a mastermind group that he ran, and I just didn't have time for everything I was doing, so I wound up bowing out of that. But his name's Aaron Walker. He actually has a book called View from the Top. He and another person that he works closely with also authored a book about mastermind groups. That would be Tom Schwab. And Tom also has a book on podcast interviews. So anyway, I've just kind of been thinking about, man, those guys are awesome. And, how can I let people know how awesome they are, knowing that, they have limited space in the mastermind groups and coaching that they do and things like that. And I realized that this is one way that you can get involved. So if you're out there as a business person looking to be involved in podcast interviews, go to Interview Valet, which is Tom's company, and they can help you get booked on a podcast. I think they're focusing in specific verticals right now, and programming is not one of them. So, just kind of be aware of that. But they do work in other areas. And then, go check out those books if you're interested in being a podcast guest and getting the word out about your company or your project. And then go read View from the Top, which is just kind of a life manual for, being successful. JD, if people want to follow up with what you're doing these days, just check out what you're thinking about. Do you have a Twitter account or a GitHub account that you post to frequently?
Have both, and I post frequently to both. And so you can find me on GitHub at jdalton, and you can find me on Twitter at jdalton as well.
Well, that's easy.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and really looking forward. I think we're going to get you scheduled on JavaScript Jabber so that we can talk more deeply about ESM loaders.
Yes.
Of course, looking at the schedule and the way that things are working out right now, we're recording this at the end of June. We'll probably wind up recording with JD sometime in August.
That's perfect.
For JavaScript Jabber, and they'll probably come out about the same time.
Yep.
Anyway, we're looking forward to that, and thank you so much for all you've done in the JavaScript community.
Thanks for having me.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.